Welcome to the Reverberations podcast, where we explore the human experience and the journey of self-discovery. Thank you for joining another episode of Reverberations. This is your host, John Stuart. I am so incredibly grateful that we have a wonderful guest that I've been fortunate enough to go into a deep dive of conversation around family dynamics and spirituality. Once again, it's a guest that I've been introduced by my dear friend, Katie Felton, who I assure you we will have on the show at a future time. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Cynthia Mendez-Tamayo. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist with additional training in trauma through the use of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, also known as EMDR. She also has background in maternal mental health and an understanding about energy work and human design, blending the world of psychology with spirituality. It's truly an honor to have you here, Cynthia. Thank you so much for being here. So I would love for you if you shared with our audience a little bit about yourself, your journey, what you're of service to, and what you're up to now.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you. And I'm so grateful to Katie for connecting us. So to share a little bit about myself and how I ended up stepping into this career, I always say that I ended up becoming a therapist by accident. Which, of course, I don't truly believe it was by accident. But the reason why I share it in that way is because my process of arriving here was really a process of following the breadcrumbs. When I started college, I started going to the University of Miami, and I originally wanted to become a biology major. I had these dreams of traveling the world and really being the next Steve Irwin, right? Like really diving deep into studying nature and how things relate to one another. And as I was going through this process, I love to share this story too, because sometimes our greatest blessings come out of what we perceive to be a failure or a mistake. And when I was at school taking my first semester at taking a pre-med biology class, I earned a C in the class and panicked and changed the whole course of my career and life based on that moment, which when I think back on it now, it makes me laugh because it seems silly that I would change the whole course of my life based on one grade. But once that happened, it really took me down a path of exploration. And I started to take a lot of psychology and sociology classes. Several years prior to that, when I was around 15 years old, my parents had separated. They had gotten divorced. It was I wouldn't say it was a bad divorce in the sense that there was a lot of dispute. The opposite, actually, my parents stopped speaking to each other altogether. Like they never communicated a word to each other again until 6 months before my mom died in 2018. And this created a lot of gaps in my experience growing up, right? My mom wasn't present for any of my graduation. She wasn't there when I got married. She wasn't there when I had my children. And a lot of this was because she struggled in coming back into the energy of that family system that she had felt abandoned by. And this left my sister and I have one sister who's a year and a half younger than I am. And we really leaned on each other throughout this process. But I also found that I was leaning on the information that I was learning through school as I was going through these psychology classes. And it really became a process of self-healing and self-awareness and really understanding not only myself, but how others show up for themselves and within our systems, and how that can lead to certain outcomes if we are not super aware of the role that we play in these situations. And then I went on to get a postgraduate degree, a master's. And while I was receiving my master's degree, I was actually a dual track when I started. I was doing mental health and marriage and family therapy. And I eventually ended up dropping the mental health. And the reason why I did that was because the systemic theories made so much more sense to me. We do not live in a vacuum. We live within systems. And we are impacted by the systems, influenced by the systems, and we also influence the systems of which we belong. And to me, understanding how those systems work seems so much more effective and vital in understanding ourselves. And mental health was more about the individual. There was always an identified patient, one person who was responsible for all the problems, which made no sense to me. And it was very focused on pathology, right? What's going wrong, labels, diagnosing. And for me, it was much more effective if I could work with somebody to shift a system than really just identifying them as the problem. And from there, I kind of developed the work that I'm doing today. And it's been such a great experience and so healing and expanding for me and understanding my past, my present, and where I want to go in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing that because, you know, I love what you said about giving yourself permission to explore. You know, like, oh man, I got this grade. And the self-healing, the self-awareness, and witnessing how others show up. And, you know, there was something that you share on your website, which I so tapped into because it led me down my path as well. In the last episode, actually, that I had with Christine McMahon, she said, better questions lead to better answers.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the simplest of questions. Actually, I believe most of the time, if not all the time, the simplest of questions lead us to the most profound answers. And you said the questions, who am I? And how do I feel all about this, really informed you in inspiring you in your career and your life purpose. Could you speak more about that?
Yeah. So when my parents separated, during that time, a lot of my friends actually had not experienced having a family where their parents were divorced. So when my sister and I experienced this, I did find myself having a lot of questions about like, what does this mean? What does this mean for me moving forward in the future? What does this mean in terms of who I am and understanding my experience and what I wanted to carry with me and what I wanted to leave behind? And one of the things that I really was able to observe in this process is that my mom in particular was very much a product of the limiting beliefs of her family of origin. And I I always share this that I and my mom, and I know that my mom felt this deeply and it created some tension between us, is that around the time that my parents separated, I had almost outgrown my mom in regards to her emotional intelligence and ability to support me and guide me. Now, I will say that my mom did set a phenomenal foundation for my sister and I, and this was something that I shared with her before she passed, right? Because she always had this sense of not being good enough or not having contributed enough to our growth and our process. And I really had to make it clear to her that I felt that she needed to hear before passing that she really did set the foundation for a lot of who I am today, right? She was very nurturing, very caring, really made it a point to instill the value of togetherness in our family, which is ironic, right? Because then the family wasn't together. But my sister and I do have a bond that we recognize a lot of other siblings don't have. And I do attribute that to my mom's really like driving home that point and setting that value. But she did stop that evolution, that growth at some point. And in being able to observe that, I was able to ask myself questions about where I wanted to go in regards to my expansion, my emotional intelligence, my ability to be resilient and problem solve. Because that's another thing I observed, that there wasn't a lot of resilience. It was like this big, horrible thing happened to me in my life. And I mean, from her perspective, right? This idea that this big, horrible thing happened to her and she wasn't able to ever move past that. Like she kind of stayed stuck and frozen in that moment. And the rest of us evolved. My dad evolved, I evolved, my sister evolved. And I think that in exploring these questions and asking myself, who do I want to be, right? Like understanding that I had free reign to fully understand myself and then create and co-create with the people that I bring into my life, the experience that I wanted for myself and how I wanted it to look different. And it really has been a continuous process, it still is, of asking myself those questions and really being intentional about how I answer the question, and then having my actions match the vision that I create in response to those questions.
That is so critically important, is that alignment. Our intentions in alignment with our actions in attention in alignment
Right.
with our intentions is so important. Thank you for pointing that out, because one of the things that I firmly believe is that we all truly know, deep within, we all
Mhm.
truly know in our heart of hearts what is appropriate, what is the most appropriate path to take. There's a disconnect that can happen in between there. And one of the things that you spoke about earlier was that we're so focused on pathology, what's wrong.
Mhm.
So that gap in between there, we focus on what do we have to fix? And it goes to that thing of like not being enough. And there's so many people that are trapped in the identity of lack, or in that identity that they're not good enough. Their self-worth is depleted based upon the traumas that they've experienced or their limited mindset. So providing them the resources and celebrating them for who they are is essentially flipping the script. And I love that you were talking about, that we're so influenced by systems.
Mhm.
And those systems are focused on pathology for the most part. And that's where we get to reimagine them. So there was something that you speak to in your practice where it's like, imagine a world where moms are supported in supporting their families, where dads can be free to redefine their roles within the family, where children are seen and parented for who they are authentically. That right there, authenticity, seeing our children, being on their level, witnessing their gifts. So beautiful. Can you speak to that statement? Because I found that so near and dear to my heart. And that for me is where we are moving into that model. I would love if you shared about that.
Yes, absolutely. So before I get into speaking about authenticity, I want to speak a little bit about the when you had mentioned us focusing on the pathology and what's wrong and going back to my roots in biology. And I always share this with my clients. It's something that I feel like there are certain one-liners that come up often, regardless of the client who's sitting in front of me. And one of them is this idea of focusing on what is wrong. And it is really a biological construct. And sometimes we don't realize that it is very much hardwired into our experience, our primitive, the primitive part of our brain. Because if you think about historically when we were living in the wild, right, and didn't have the experiences and hadn't evolved to where we are today, it really mattered for us to focus on what could go wrong. It was a matter of survival, right? So I always share with my clients, you could leave work and be like skipping and on a cloud and had the best day you've ever had at your job, and on the way, and you're super excited, you're talking to your friend or a family member, you're telling them all these great things, you got a promotion, everybody was working collaboratively, it was just the best day ever, and on the way home you get a flat tire, and all of a sudden it turns into a bad day, right? Like we are like, this was not a good day at all, and we really focus on that one bad thing that happened and forget all the other positive things that occurred. And we are hardwired to do that. And the reason why I want to share that is because it allows us to give ourselves some grace and to understand that that is something that we are hardwired to do and that we can shift from that, right? So we don't live in a world, most of us, where survival is at the forefront 24/7. Most of what threatens us today is purely psychological. It's happening in our mind. Our mind does not know the difference between something that is really happening and something that we're thinking about. So we have to be mindful of the thoughts that come into our brain, right? And really look at and reframe and look at all the other things that went well. To add to that, and moving into authenticity, we start to define ourselves based on the things that are not going well, or the things that are quote unquote our weaknesses, right? Which doesn't allow us to notice the things that are our strengths, which are the things that really define who we are. So I imagine that if we could support moms, and the reason I want to explain a little bit why moms, why do I talk? I mean, besides the fact that I'm a mom, I'm probably a little bit biased to the experience of a mom, right? Because that is my frame of reference. But I also believe, I say that moms are the portal into the family. And the reason why I say that is because I believe that moms have a lot of influence in shifting the way that the family functions, right? Many times moms manage the logistical part of families. They often bring in ideas and thoughts about how to run the family. And I think that when mom is healthy and mom is supported, and it's not that I think this, actually, research supports this. There's research out there that supports that if mom is functioning well and mom has a good foundation and mom is supported, that then the family thrives as a whole, right? They kind of set the tone for that. So if moms are functioning well, then moms can bring in dads or partners. And then as a unit, they can create a system, but there has to be intentionality and there has to be self-awareness. They can create a unit, a system that is intentionally supportive of each player, right? Because the game here is not that mom be thriving and everybody else kind of fall by the wayside. The idea here is that the whole unit can rise together. But in order to do this, there has to be, each individual has to evolve and grow and then come together in a way that allows the system to thrive. And every system's going to be different. My family is going to look very different from your family or from, the next person's family, because the players are different and the needs are different and the values are different. And you'd be surprised how many people cannot even answer the question of what are the biggest values for you? What are the biggest values that you want to transmit to your children? What are your desires? What are your children's desires? We spend a lot of time telling our children who and what they should be, and we don't create space for them to really explore that on their own. And we've been passing that on for many generations, and it may have served us at some point. I'm not saying that the way that the family system functioned traditionally was necessarily wrong at a certain time. I think it was created because it served a purpose. But as a collective, we have evolved and our systems have not caught up yet. And that is really the change that I'm trying to usher into the world, is that there's a clear need for changing our systems. And I really believe that if we start at the basic unit of the family, then we can create a ripple effect that will impact our bigger systems.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, that ripple effect is essentially what the show is all about, reverberations. It's sending out the ripple effect to align with those that feel into the message, right?
Right.
It almost echolocates. And so going back to the potency of the mother-child relationship, the research definitely does support that. One of the most powerful subliminal messages, or messages that can be shared for aiding in self-motivation or aiding in the healing of generational trauma, is "Mommy and I are one." And it's so fascinating. A statement like that, where it's either repeated or whether it's played through a subliminal message, is so powerful in healing childhood trauma, parental dysfunction, family dysfunction. So I'm so with you that a lot of our challenges in society can be healed through the family dynamic, and really how we meet our children, how we see our children, how we support our children, the questions that we ask, and being curious about them, because every situation is different. Every child is different. I have 3 children, and each of them are so unique in their own way. And I'm definitely with you on that. We don't come into this world with a manual of how to be a parent. There's what to expect when you're expecting, and there's all these other things that are out
Yes.
there. And, we can't homogenize parenting. We can't homogenize the family. What we can do is we can reimagine of what it is like to create a future based upon our values. And when you spoke to that, it really, really landed deeply within me, because that's where I feel we are moving in society. Is we have a value-based system. We have ethics. How do we consciously evolve there? And conscious evolution is moving forward through choice. And it goes back to what we were saying before, is matching our actions with our intentions. And it's not easy. It's not the easiest thing to do. Though when we give ourselves permission to move with grace, as you spoke to, there's a forgiveness that is there. There's a recognition that we don't have to be perfect, that we don't have all the answers, that it's, and going back to the pathology piece is how hardwired it is into our dynamics of focusing on what's wrong. One of the things that I am so deeply rooted in is remembering, and that there's such a grace and there's such a softness that comes into that space of where we give ourselves the permission to be like, you know what? I don't have it all figured out, and that's okay.
Yes.
But what I do remember is, you know what? I figured it out before. I do have tools. I do have resources. And the most important thing is I don't need to do it all alone. And I think the greatest challenge that we have, not I think, I'm fairly confident right now, is that the greatest pandemic really right now is one of isolation and loneliness. And in that space, we feel like we're not supported, that we have to do this on our own. Going back to the mental health piece that you spoke to, is in my generation, if I went to the guidance counselor at school, I was a weirdo. I had a problem. I was going to be,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, I'm walking through school with my hands over my face, not wanting to be seen. And now, what I love about the younger generation is the topics around emotional wellness and how to navigate emotions are so much more open and fluid. So I feel that we're moving in that direction. Now, a question that I have for you, because I really enjoyed reading about your coaching model that you have. And I think this speaks to it. So it's the AID model, the AIDE, right? And awareness, identity, intention, reconditioning, and embodiment. Can you walk us through that coaching model?
So the A model, the first one would be awareness. So awareness is really having an understanding of what our experience has been up until that moment, right? So really understanding what are the things that I have received from my family of origin, right? Like, what are the things that have been taught to me? Just having a lot of clarity over what are my values, right? And that question can actually go deeper than just what are my values, because some of my values that I believe are my values may not actually be my values. They may be values that were passed on to me by my family and told that they are supposed to be my values, but really sitting with these, compiling like a list or I guess, yeah, a list of what are these things that were part of my family culture, my family origin. Because that's another interesting thing that happens. We leave our family of origin and then enter a different family system, right? Which could be very different from the one that we left. And usually what I find happens is that individuals tend to either subconsciously recreate the family that they came from, the family of origin, because it's what they know, regardless of whether or not it's something that they subscribe to themselves, or they may have been so negatively impacted by their family system that they may want to go to the complete opposite extreme, which sometimes isn't what they really want either, right? So there's no intentionality in regards to how they're creating this new family experience, because we're born into our family of origin, but we create the family that we move into later in life, right? So really just having this awareness of what are the things that make up who I am right now, and almost taking inventory, like which parts do I want to keep? Which parts don't make sense anymore? And maybe they did make sense at some point, but we also evolve as individuals. And this is something that I think we have to do continuously throughout our lives, is take inventory, because what we wanted at one point in our lives can change in a different space and time because we change, and hopefully we're changing, right? I don't want to be the same person today that I was when I'm 20. Are there aspects of my 20-year-old self that are still a part of who I am today? Absolutely. But there are a lot of parts that no longer serve me, and I have to learn to release them. So once we have taken inventory, we can move on to the space of identity, right? Which is really becoming clear in regards to who I want to be, right? And not having it happen in some haphazard way. I think sometimes people step into this identity and it's like, oh, I'm just a creation or a product of my experiences, but we don't have to be. We can have our experiences and still create an identity that is aligned with who we want to be and move into that space, right? Because then we will align our decisions and our actions to create that experience, even if that's not what we're sitting in at the present moment, right? But if we don't know what that is, then we can't move into that space. Once you have the identity, it's the deconditioning process. And the deconditioning process is creating new habits and behaviors, right? A lot of the things that we do are based on our programming. And this is probably one of the most difficult steps, simply because there's going to be a lot of trial and error and a lot of perceived failures in this process. Because when we are not very mindful, I mean, we only use 10% of our conscious mind. That means everything else that is happening in our subconscious. And the way that I describe this to people, it's like when you have your computer running, like right now we're on this call, right? And you're on the forefront of my computer, but I may have other programs that are running in the background, and those programs are interfering with the process, even if I'm not aware of it and I can't see it. So think about that. Only 10% of our experience is happening in a very intentional way, and all the other programs are running in the background. What happens is that when we're not mindful and we're not conscious about where we want to go and who we are, we fall into that default programming, which is going to take us back to the things we learned, right? The things that we were conditioned to do and the ways that we were conditioned to be. One example that I like to share about that is one of the generational patterns in my family that has been passed down through my mom's lineage is using guilt to manipulate and get what you want. I saw my grandmother do this. I didn't know my grandmother's mom, so I don't know if she did it, but I can probably say with quite certainty that she did. My mom used it at a lesser degree than my grandmother did, but I would still see it. And I have been very intentional seeing this generational pattern of trying not to do that in my parenting experience. Sometimes when I'm not super aware, I will find myself saying something, right? And then saying something that is using guilt to get something from my kids or get them to do something. And this is when we always say like, oh my God, I sound just like my mom or dad, right? Because that's the programming. It's the programming that we default to. And we don't need to berate ourselves or punish ourselves for this. We just need to understand that the reprogramming part takes time, intentionality, and consistency, right? So when we step into the space of deconditioning, we're just really being mindful of what are the things that I'm trying to shift and change. And then comes the embodiment, right? The embodiment is when we are living out the way that we want to be, right? So we created this identity. So there was the awareness, who am I? Identity, who I want to be, deconditioning the things that need to be changed or fixed or modified so that I can be that person. And then the embodiment is I'm stepping into being this person. I am this person, right? Embodiment is all about the I am statements. So sometimes it helps to even write those down, right? Even if you're not those things yet, writing it down, this is where the affirmations come in, right? I am whatever it is that you want to be, and inserting all those statements so that you can learn to step into them and fully embody that.
Yes, 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 once again. And thank you for walking us through that because I feel, and I would like to hear your take on it, is when we take care of ourselves and when we are mindful and when we're consciously aware of our patterns, our programs, our actions, when we take care of ourselves, everything begins to take care of itself. So it begins to ripple out. So when I take care of me, then I'm able to be more present with my children. I'm able to be more available for my purpose. I'm able to be more present in my conversations with my friends, with my family, with someone at the store. You know, walking us through that process of awareness, identity, intention, reconditioning, and embodiment is such a fluid process of, you know, when you were speaking to the who am I, there's one thing that I do often, and I actually just did it a couple of weeks ago, is a values assessment. Is always coming back and seeing, because my values may have shifted over time. It's not that those aren't my values anymore. It might be that there's other values that are more present in my awareness because those are the ones that I'm leaning into. That's where my growth is. That's what's really lighting me up in this moment in time. And then there's some that are going to be the bedrocks of my foundation. And you know, and one of the things that you spoke to is so critical is what's mine and what's indoctrinated, because those values I might have just associated with and attached to because, oh, wow, you know, it's my family of origin and this is what they believed. So I'm believing them and it's running my whole entire program when it's really not even the essence of who I am. So that looking into that, and so that we don't recreate the past. Or the part that you talked about also is I don't want to be anything like that. So the pendulum swings the other way, which,
Right.
you know, that also can create its own challenges. So
Yes.
continually taking inventory, I'm so with you on that because the work, or we're always learning, and that being magnetized by our curiosity is so important so that we don't get stuck. And thank you for speaking to the identity too. I did a wonderful workshop with a dear friend of mine over the past weekend in Jackson, Wyoming. And one of the things that came up was identity, and it created challenge for some of the people in the workshop because the identity, it's I'm a single mom, I'm this, I'm that. And those are just associations and attachments to labels, which have nothing to do with who we
Yes.
are. And we become so stuck in that. And it was interesting to see how people were still stuck in the old model of attaching to a label of who they have to be, who they have to show up as, rather than, hold on a second, who am I really? My identity actually is me being in alignment with my soul's yes, my
Mhm.
truest truth. And that takes, at times, a little bit of risk of not being who we thought that we were and being totally okay with being our most authentic self. And that's where I feel like you did a really incredible job of speaking to the reconditioning, the remembering
Yes.
of who we are, because that shift does take time. It does take patience. And so many people want to take the pill. They want the quick fix. They want it right here, right now, because we're microwaving our society. And
Yes.
unfortunately, anything really worth its value takes time. We look at a diamond doesn't happen immediately. It's compression over a period of time when its purity comes alive in that space. And then we get to embody who we are. We get to embody that brilliance because we've given ourselves permission to take the time to do the work, to remember who we are, to continuously take inventory and remember the I am essence. So thank you for walking us through that process for our listeners, because it gives the framework, and that's essentially reimagining the process of coming into our truest truth. So thank you very much for speaking to that. And I asked a question earlier and I totally forgot what it was at the very beginning because I got so pulled into all of this.
Actually, I want to comment a little bit on something that you just said. Two things, actually. So one, when you mentioned the taking the pill, right? And this idea of the quick fixes, right? We live in a society where we have this idea of quick fixes, even though they're really not quick fixes. But I was actually having this conversation with a client the other day around how a lot of the way that we address our dissatisfaction with our lives is by creating mechanisms that will allow us to better tolerate what we don't want. Right. And that for me is, and just a little caveat on taking medicine. I think there is a place for medicine and I think it does serve some individuals, but
Absolutely.
I do struggle within my practice with the idea that a lot of times it is the immediate go-to. I mean, there's primary physicians that prescribe antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, all of this, which they probably shouldn't be. It should be the psychiatrist. But even the psychiatrist is oftentimes not asking what is going on in your life that could be contributing to your feelings of sadness or your anxiety, right? And is there something that you need to really be honest with and look at in your life experience that could be modified that ultimately would not result in having to take this pill, but instead we take the pill to be able to numb ourselves, to be able to better experience, like tolerate the situation. It's why people get into substance abuse issues as well, right? We're taking this substance to numb ourselves from this experience that we don't want to be in, and we never really consider that we could change the experience. Right. And just the thought of that feels so overwhelming because many times we don't even know where to begin. We may not even know what the problem is until we start to really look at it more closely and break it apart. And now we're just tolerating this experience that we don't want to be in. Nothing has changed. And this is why people stay on these medications forever, because once you get off of the med, if nothing's changed in your experience, oh, well, here I'm kind of reaffirmed that I'm not ready and I need to continue taking it. And it becomes a lifelong experience and you're still dissatisfied. You're just able to not have the symptoms that are showing up because of that dissatisfaction. So I really want people to, if they're feeling this way, and again, I think sometimes the way that I describe medications to my clients, because sometimes I do suggest it, ask them to go get evaluated. But the way that I look at the medication, and this is the way that I describe it to them, is like, it's like if you're in your car, you sit in your car and you turn on your GPS, right? Most of us use our GPS when we're going to an unfamiliar location. We put the address in and the GPS is telling us how to get there. And we're driving along and it's a very, very foggy morning, right? You can barely see the traffic light in front of you. And the GPS is telling you, okay, make a right turn on Clark Street. But you can't see Clark Street because there's so much fog that you cannot see where you're supposed to turn. And the comparison here is that in therapy, I am the GPS, right? My client is driving the car. I'm telling them to turn at Clark Street. They can't see because there's too much fog. What the medication is intended to do is to lift the fog, clear the fog, so that now I can guide you to that destination that you're trying to get to. And then ideally, you get off the medication, right? But what's happening is that people are not equipping their GPS, so then they don't know where they're going, how to get there, what's the most efficient way to get there. So really just being mindful about the tools that we have available to us and using them in a way that is productive and efficient. And I'm so glad, like you said, that so many more people are open to the idea of having therapy or coaching or some type of guidance to get to where they're trying to get. The second thing I wanted to speak to was the value system, right? And understanding that those value systems and taking inventory, right? Are these really my values or not? Many times they come from our family of origin. They also come from society as a whole, right? And sometimes we don't even understand the value that we're implementing or if we're implementing it correctly. And I'll explain what I mean by this. This morning, actually, I was on Facebook and had read a meme or something that somebody had posted, and it really got me thinking about values and the idea of respect, right? Respect is a value that a lot of people, buy into and it's one of their fundamental value systems. But when we think about respect, how are we defining respect? What does respect mean? And does everybody give and receive respect? Do we expect some people to give respect, but not others? And the prime example of this is that when it comes to respect, there are a lot of things that we expect kids to do, children, because a lot of times children are treated like second-class citizens. We expect children to engage in certain behaviors that don't uphold that value system. So I find that many times you will see a dynamic where adults, and this is a societal thing, where adults will be disrespectful towards children without even realizing that they're doing so. And they expect to be respected by that child. And one of the big ways that I see this is when we cut off a child's voice. Children are meant to be seen and not heard. Children are meant to speak to elders in a certain way, but we can speak to them however we please. And that has never made sense to me. And this morning I was questioning, I'm like, because somebody put a post that said something like, somebody needs to teach our children that if they respond to an adult with the word what, they're being rude. I was thinking about that and I'm like, well, if I call out my child and I say, hey, Anthony, and he says, what? Do I feel disrespected? I don't, but I can see how from a societal perspective, an older individual, I mean, I would be considered an older individual to my child, would see that as disrespectful. And for me, I'm like, I called him. He responded with a question. What? Why are you calling me? And the reason why I point this out is because it made me think, was I raised in a household where we were rude? And I don't think my family was rude. And I never get feedback that my children are rude. But I realized that I grew up in a house where I was allowed to have a voice. I was allowed to speak my mind. And my father and I speak about this a lot because he really is of that mindset that children have a lot to contribute to our systems and our family and our society, and they deserve to have a voice and they deserve to be respected. And many times we don't do that. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's not only identifying our value, but it's also having a clear understanding of how we're using it. And are we using it in a way that really aligns with the value itself?
Yes, so incredibly powerful. Just like your father, my grandfather also shared something very similar. I've shared this on prior podcasts. I would go down and my grandfather would be downstairs working on, he was like a beautiful mind. He had these Post-its all over the place and notepads, and he had lists for everything. And it was just fascinating. And there was one day when I walked down there and I'd gotten in trouble at school for being quite vocal, which was fairly regular
Me
because I
too.
was, and I shared with him, And he said something along these lines: don't ever stop using your voice.
Mhm.
Always speak your truth. That has been a driving force in my life. I've always been vocal, whether or not people liked it. I always sat with the question when I reflected, was I wrong in sharing that? And ultimately, it always comes back to, well, maybe I could have, uh, you know, tamed my tone, or maybe I could have done this. But ultimately, I was sharing my truth,
Mhm.
and I wasn't intended to harm anyone. It was just sharing my perspective. And that has shaped one of my core belief systems is children aren't the future. Children are right here, right now. And what they say matters. And more often than not, they are the ones that are teaching us. And I would love for you to share about the family model again, and going back to that, because at the core of all of this, and in the body of your work, and with the clients that you work with, in the family dynamic, and talking about reimagining that world of what the family dynamic can be and how we can support a more sustainable and harmonious co-creative experience, especially within the family dynamic. How do you feel in your profession and personally that we could be better together in that aspect?
Yes. So first, I'm going to start with how I even came to want to focus on this work, right? So I already shared the story about why I went down the path of marriage and family, or family systems theories, which a systemic therapist is probably a better term rather than marriage and family, because marriage and family sometimes is limiting and people don't fully understand what it means. So I explained how I came to going down that track. But when I first started, I wasn't working specifically with moms or families, right? I was working with individuals and creating shifts in the family through the individuals. But my focus was not really this bigger picture of redefining the family system. And the way that this came to be was there were two things that occurred that really solidified that this was the path that I was going to take. One was getting married and becoming a mother myself. So my husband and I have been together for 20 years, but we were together for 8 or 9 years prior to getting married and having children. And as a unit, as a partnership, we functioned well, right? We had come up with a dynamic that worked for us. We knew when to come together, when we needed space. Everything was functioning well. And then we had children. And we had our first child, my son Anthony, who's 9 years old. He'll be 10 in April. And if there's one thing that I realize is there's nothing like having children that will expose the cracks in the foundation of the partnership, right?
Totally.
Because there were conversations that we never had to have as partners, maybe should have, and that's something that I'm working towards creating too for couples moving forward. There were conversations that we never had about how we would want to raise our children, right? I mean, we knew each other well enough to know, like I knew who he was and his values, and he knew mine, but we never really discussed how those would come together in raising a child, because it didn't matter when we were partners, right? You have yours, I have mine. We respect that space between us, even if some of the values were not fully aligned. But now when we have to transmit these values to another human being, and there's a lot of investment in this, right? Because there's this really deep-seated, again, going back to biology, there's this deep-seated drive to pass certain things on to our children, because it's the survival of our species, right? That's part of our drive, is to transmit these things not only through our DNA but through experience as well, to ensure that they thrive and survive and all the things. So now we are at odds on how we want to address certain things, do certain things. This is creating tension between him and I, which is also creating tension in the parenting relationship. And for a while, honestly, it was a hot mess. Like we were really struggling. My husband and I, like I said, we've been together 20 years. For the first time ever, after I had my second child around 2019, we put the word divorce on the table, which we had never really spoken about separating prior to this, because it became so difficult to manage the family experience that we got to the point where we were like, okay, well, should we just throw in the towel and move on? Because I also think that there's a significance in understanding when that should happen as well, right? And I think that sometimes it does need to happen. So simultaneously, we move into the pandemic, right? Everybody gets forced to be at home. Moms are doing all the things. And I realized that I was having clients come to me. At first, I was like, I don't want to work with moms and families because I'm in it. Like I'm in the trenches, and I didn't feel like I could support another mom or family system when I was still trying to figure out my mess, right? Boy, was I wrong, because it's fully aligned with where my work is supposed to be, right? Because as I start figuring these things out, and as I've been figuring these things out, I've been able to share and coach my clients and bring them along. One of my other one-liners is, I only have to be a few steps ahead of my clients. And that's how I lead and they can follow, right? That doesn't mean that I have to have all the parts figured out, but I need to know enough to be able to bring them into the process. And then we can go down this path together. So what I started seeing during the pandemic was that moms were feeling very overwhelmed. They were feeling burnt out. They were feeling unsupported. They were feeling unfulfilled. Suicidal ideation. I would hear moms say all the time, maybe my family would be better off without me. What am I contributing to my family? I'm failing at this miserably. And I really sat with these statements and feeling it deeply within myself, right? I hadn't really experienced suicidal ideation up to this point, but many times I said out loud, I remember telling my sister many times out loud, I just want to get in the car and drive away and not come back, right? Which is a pretty difficult thing to say when I love my family. I love my husband. I love my children. But sometimes things became so heavy and I felt so drained that I just wanted to disappear. And I started to sit with this and really think about what is going on. Why are moms experiencing this? Why are families struggling? Because it wasn't only the moms. We see it in our children, right? We talk about the increase in mental health, and we see all these events that are happening in the world with our kids. So we're seeing that there's a disconnect there. Suicidal rates in men is super high, right? So why is this happening? And I really started to contemplate and sit with it. And this is what I came up with. Post-feminism, a lot of things changed in the world. A lot of things changed for women in particular. We had more opportunities. We were now given permission to follow our dreams, our desires, to do the things we wanted to do, to enter the corporate world. And this was wonderful. And it's been wonderful. But what didn't happen was a shift in the family. So now what happened is that both parents are absent from the family system. The children are left alone. Both parents are depleted because they're trying, and particularly mom, right? Because now mom's role is not as defined as it was before. In the traditional family system, mom stayed home, cared for the kids, managed the household, dad went out and provided. Whether or not these were the roles that mom and dad wanted to subscribe to was irrelevant, because it was what they did, and there was some usefulness in understanding, right? It's like when you run a business and everybody has a job title or description. Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, where they're supposed to be, what they're responsible for. And if something falls through the cracks, we know who to go to hold accountable. Well, now the family system's messy because we don't know who to hold accountable for what or who's supposed to be doing what. And a lot of it was falling on mom, right? She's still managing the household. She's still responsible for caring for the kids. She's trying to pursue her dreams or trying to also provide for the family. And she feels like she's failing at it all because it's too much. And dads who may want to help, because it's not, I don't want to give dads a bad rap. I think there's many men out there that want to be able to support the family system in a more intentional and helpful way, but they don't know how to because we don't have a system to work from. We don't have a model to show us this is the way that you do it. And I don't know if we had a model right now, if it would really make a lot of sense either, because I really believe that families need to be creating this for their family unit. Because right now, because those roles are not so clearly defined, we can take on any role we want. So this brought me to the Thriving Families coaching model, which starts with its 4 pillars. And the first pillar is the well-being of mom. And as I explained before, it's this idea that mom is the portal into the family. And if mom can become very clear on what it is that she desires and wants for her family, and is able to strengthen herself and have a lot of awareness, clarity, step into her authenticity, then we can move on to the second pillar, which is the partnership, right? Bringing in her partner, because dads or partners need to be invited into this process, and sharing, this is what I would like for myself and the family. What would you like for yourself and the family, right? And really having a conversation about where the gray space is in between that. We think a lot in terms of black and white, and we don't really think about where is the middle ground where you can feel supported and I can feel supported. Well, first we need to feel seen. And then once we feel seen, we can create a dynamic that is supportive, right? And once the family, the parental unit is clear on that, then they can come up with what they want to transmit into the family unit. And then we move on to the third pillar, which is home logistics. And this is literally running the house like a business. What are going to be the roles for each individual? And this may change over time. This is not set in stone. Again, you have to take inventory every once in a while, because the roles that my children may have, and yes, the children get a role as well. The roles that my children may have at age 9 and 7, which is where they're at now, could be very different by the time they're teenagers, right? So how do we run the family in a way that supports what each one of us wants and desires, right? Does that mean that we are taking things off the plate? I had a client the other day tell me she had been sick for a few days, and she sends me a message and she's like, I finally feel better. She's like, I decided that this year I'm skipping the family pictures and the holiday cards. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, was doing the family pictures and the holiday cards something that brought you satisfaction? She's like, no, I hated it. And I'm like, well, why do you do them then? She's like, well, it's what you're supposed to do, right? Well, is it? I mean, I don't do them because to me, the idea of getting my family together to take family portraits and sending out cards sounds miserable. So it's something that I leave off my list of things to do. So if it doesn't serve a purpose for me and or my family, or if it isn't fulfilling for me and or my family, then it doesn't make it onto my list. And if there's something on my list that needs to be done that I don't want to do, my husband doesn't want to do, my children are either not capable or don't want to do it, is it something that we can resource out? Sometimes we're going to have to do things we don't want to do, right? But I think if we become very clear on what are the things that, and even the things that we don't want to do, if we're clear on why we're doing them, like why does it serve a purpose for my family, then it makes it more tolerable, right, to do the thing. So home logistics, really sitting down and implementing the logistical process to run the family in a way where we all feel supported. And then the last pillar is parenting. And parenting really comes down to seeing and understanding our children for who they are, right? So being clear on what is the value system that we want to uphold as a family, and we can invite our children into that process as well, right? What are the values that they want to bring into the family? Are they okay with the values that we want to bring in? And maybe some of those values will still persist even if they say no, but at least they'll understand why that value is important, right? They can abandon it later on in life if they want, but also what's valuable for them. Like for my son, he's always bringing up wanting to serve. He feels tormented every time he sees a homeless person, and he's like, hand them your wallet. And I'm like, okay, well, this is so important to you. As you continue to get older, we will come up with ways that we can serve the community in a way that feels aligned for you, because that is something that I want to tap into as being his value. So parenting, and in the parenting, I also use human design, which I'll introduce here for the first time. So human design creates an energy blueprint for us. And there's 5 different energy types, and it really allows us to see how we best function as an individual and in relation to others. And for me, it was very helpful to see the difference in my children's energy types, right? My daughter's a projector, my son's a generator. And just something as simple as understanding that because my son is a sacral being, he gets a yes-no gut impulse. So for him, I'm a generator as well. I have to ask him yes or no questions, or this or that questions, in order to help him arrive at what is aligned for him. My daughter, as a projector, I have to ask her open-ended questions. So just something as simple as that, a little tweak like that, has really been able to allow me to tap into who they are and what their needs are, like seeing what their needs are according to their energy type and allowing them to explore that for themselves has been so helpful.
Yeah, in everything that you shared, what it leads me to is the deeper conversation, of having that depth within our relationship. So each person within the dynamic feels seen, feels supported, feels valued, and met in that space. Because then we're safe. We feel sovereign in our being and able to explore our authenticity and who we really are. And that's so crucial in our evolution of where we're moving into. So I really appreciate, you sharing more about that, because within our family dynamic, there can be a lot of constriction. There can be a lot of overbearing expectations that limit us. And that can be the mom, it could be the dad, it could be the children, it could be, the entire family dynamic is being compromised because there isn't that fluidity, there isn't that openness, there isn't that permission to feel free to express ourselves in the most open of ways, that safety that comes along with that. And that's a topic that is talked about a lot, is safety. And what does that mean? What is it really? Does it mean being free from harm? My own personal experience with that is, as long as we're not intentionally creating undue harm mentally, physically, spiritually, or emotionally, then we're providing a safe space for people to be authentic in their own beingness. So thank you for speaking to that deeper conversation within the family dynamic, and then introducing human design as well. For those that aren't familiar with human design, would you like to just tap into that a little bit and share what that's all about?
So human design combines astrology, the I Ching, Kabbalah, the chakra system, and quantum physics. And what it does is it uses your birth information to create an energy blueprint. And the energy blueprint has 9 centers. And from these 9 centers, it gives you an energy type, and it shows you which areas you have consistent access to the energy. It also gives you profile lines, which tells you kind of like how you move through the world. So for example, my profile line is a 1-3, and the 1 is the experimenter. I'm sorry, the 1 is the researcher. So for me, in order for me to feel, and it's funny because when I think back on my experience before I knew about human design, I can see this and understand how aligned it is for me. So as the researcher, I have to collect a lot of information to be able to feel safe and grounded and stable, right? I remember when I started at there was like an ongoing joke behind closed doors between my dad and his partner at the time, that they would ask each other, like, is she going to be in school forever? Because I loved to learn. I still love to learn. I'm constantly learning. And that is very aligned for me. And my 3 line is the experimenter. So part of how I move through the world is through a process of trial and error. So I need to, as I learn the information, that I put it into practice, and I learn from the failure. So when I fail at something, I ask myself, what did I learn from this? And every time that I ask myself, what do I learn from this? I move closer to what it is that I'm trying to achieve or gain. One example that I always share about this is that when I was, before I was with my husband and I was dating, people would ask, like, what's your type? And to me, it always seemed like the silliest question, right? Because I was like, if I knew what my type was, then I would already identify that person and be like, hey, you're the person I'm going to be with. What I would say to them instead is, I don't know what my type is, but each time I step out of a relationship, I know what I don't want. And that brings me closer to what I do want. And that is literally how I move through my life. It's really this process of trying things, figuring out what I don't want, and then stepping into what I do want. When I look at my daughter's profile, she has a 4 in her profile. The 4 is all about networking and really about their people. And sometimes that energy can feel really intense for me because she wants to be like, she's very, very intense about her people and really want to the point where she almost comes across as bossy. But it's part of her energy, right? And understanding that allows me to guide her properly. She has a lot of leadership energy, and again, comes across as bossy. So she has struggled with peer relationships because of that. And think about all the times that we give children a message about who they are, right? She may be told, you're bossy, stop doing that, you're being mean, you need to be more collaborative, you need to do all these things. And now she becomes an adult who had all these excellent skills to be a leader and never steps into a leadership role because all her childhood, she was told that it was wrong for her to be that way. So instead, the message that I share with her is, baby, you are a great leader and you are going to be a wonderful leader as you continue to grow. But you need to make sure that you are leading people that want to be led by you. If they don't want to be led by you, that is okay. You will find your people, but you can't force people to do what you want. That's a very different message. I'm not telling her that the way that she's showing up is wrong. What I'm telling her is that she needs to allow herself to be and to attract the people that want what she has to offer instead of forcing herself onto people.
Yeah, such a powerful message.
Yes. And then my son is a 6-3. So they're double 3. He's a double 3, which means there's a lot of trial and error. My husband is a projector, who are the keepers of wisdom, wants to tell my son all the way that things need to be done. My son is literally that child that if you tell him, I have a 3 profile, so I understand it a little bit, but he has a double 3, so it's more intense. We're that people that if you tell us don't touch that, that's hot, we're going to be like, I'm going to touch it to see how hot it is, right? It's part of his experience. So what I tell my husband is you can't force yourself on him and tell him how to do things, because the way that he is going to develop what he the way that he's going to figure out where he needs to go and what he wants in life is through experimenting. So if we kill that process of him experimenting, he'll never discover who he is. So all we can do is create a buffer around how he does that and hope and pray that he never experiments with something that is not reparable, right? But give him that freedom to try different things. And then when he seemingly fails at something, asking him that question, what did you learn from that? And how can that help you move closer to what you want? Because that is how he is going to step into his power. So understanding that about just that, I mean, there's so much in the chart, but just those two little details in understanding my children has made a world of difference in how we as a parental unit approach them and interact with them. And it has really been such a different experience. And it also takes a little bit of the pressure off of us as parents, right? Because it does give us a little bit of the, I mean, it's still not a manual, right? It doesn't tell us exactly how to do it, but it does give us information to start to play with and experiment ourselves in terms of guiding our children.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, any tool or resource that we can have to support us on our journey is such a benefit. You know,
Yes.
that it offers us a platform to be able to reference or to look at or to become curious about the tendencies or the possibilities that are available for us and witnessing a little bit more about ourselves. So thank you so much for sharing more about human design, because I know a lot of people have heard about it. Maybe not a lot of people know exactly what it is. Um, you do have on your website where people can get a free human design reading or the free human design chart on your website, correct?
Yes. So if they visit my website, which is soulalignedwellness.org, they can go on there and they can get a copy of their energy blueprint. And it'll also come with a little report that will explain some of the different aspects, like the basic parts of the chart. They can also, I also have a resource on my website where if they download the document, it's called Self-Care by Design, and it'll actually give them some information about how to leverage their self-care process and routine according to their design. I talk to my clients a lot about self-care because it is very important for us to engage in behaviors and habits that are restorative for us, right? Because again, if we are doing well, then we're able to better support the individuals around us and our systems. But self-care has kind of become a buzzword. It's thrown around haphazardly a lot, to the point where many people, when I talk particularly to moms about self-care, they almost like, you know, have like this reaction to it. And they're like, Cynthia, I don't have time or the money to engage in self-care. And the reason why I created this resource is because it's not about doing all the things that we're told that we need to do, right? It's all about getting the most bang for your buck. It's doing the things. If you don't have a lot of resources in terms of time and money, I want to make sure I'm going to invest the time and money that I have in doing the thing that is going to be the most restorative for me, instead of doing all the things. Because doing all the things actually does the opposite of what we intend for self-care to do. So if you understand your energy type, then you will know what are the things that you can shift in your experience to better manage your energy.
Yeah. You know, that's so true as far as adding so many things to the plate. I was one of those people that I've got to work out, I've got to meditate, I've got to do my yoga nidra, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. And it was actually creating more stress in my life. You
Mm-hmm.
know? And I mean, it's what I do for a living, and it's what I provide for my clients. And, you know, you shared this earlier. It's like we're our own best resource when we're able to reflect on our life. You know, when you were talking about what you were going through, and thank you so much for speaking to that when you were talking about when divorce came on the table. And then you were like, hold up a second. Experience is the best teacher. So being able to provide that for your clients and being able to speak to it from a place of experiential opportunity, it really provides a foundation for people to be more trusting and relatable when we're able to speak to those things in our own dynamics. So it's like I always reflect upon, my experience, I'm like, man, I really stressed myself out when I put so much on the plate because self-care for me is the foundation of self-love. When we care
Mhm.
for ourselves, and it doesn't need to be a laundry list of things. It could be if I'm at work and I'm in my cubicle and I'm stressed out, it's just shutting my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and just feeling into the moment and just having a moment of gratitude. Just that right there to pause. The power of the pause could be so powerful.
Yes.
So that self-love for me is really the essence of what I feel self-worth is. The more that we care and have compassion for ourselves, the deeper our love for ourselves becomes. And the more that we value ourselves, the greater our boundaries become, because now we're saying no to what isn't in alignment and we're saying yes to what is in our heart, what is in our soul, and what our vision actually speaks to. Um, the human design, what I've found is it provides this almost like a little bit of a mapping of our
Hmm.
our our being, like an energetic blueprint that you were
Yes.
speaking to, right? So thank you very much for speaking to that. And I know that you shared about how you feel that we can support a more sustainable and harmonious co-creative human experience. Um, though, is there anything else that you would like to share? Any message that you want to convey, or what really in the deepest of your being, if there was a message that you just wish to sing from the mountaintops, what would that be?
We all need to pursue the exploration and the embodiment of being our most authentic self. I truly believe that we each come with a special gift, a special contribution to the whole. And if we give ourselves permission to explore this, then we are able to serve the whole in a way that will be supportive of the entire system. And when I speak of system from this perspective, I don't mean just the family system, I mean the world, right? I really believe that if we are able to be ourselves and through that model to our children that they also have permission to be themselves, right? Like even with the human design aspect and understanding my needs, I'm able to communicate to my children and my family who I am and what my needs are, and it doesn't become personal, right? An example of that is one day I was in the backyard gardening because I took on gardening during the pandemic because I needed something to do that I could do on my own. And one day I was in the backyard with my daughter and she was in our swimming pool jumping in and out. And I was in the corner of the yard repotting a plant. And she kept trying to get my attention, right? She kept running up to me and then running in the water and asking me questions. And I was kind of like being a little dismissive towards her. And I noticed again, she wants to connect all the time. So she started to become irritable. And I finally looked at her and I said, Emery, I'm okay with you being out here with me and being in the pool. But right now, I want to focus on what I'm doing alone. So could you please go play and I'll come back and find you when I'm done? And she looked at me and said, all you care about are your plants. And she walked away. And I left it alone for a moment. I finished what I was doing. And then I circled back to her. Because again, I understand how negative cognitions can be created in our minds, right? And negative cognitions create the filter in which we see the world. So I went up to her because, of course, I don't want my beautiful, lovely daughter to feel like mom is not interested in her or doesn't care about her. And I circled back to her and I said, baby, I'm like, I love you deeply and you matter so much to me, but I also matter so much to me. And one of the things that mommy needs is time by herself every once in a while so that I can feel better and so that I can have more energy to be able to connect with you when you need me to, when it's time to connect with you, right? Because I understand that that is important for you. But if I'm not taking care of myself, I cannot connect with you. So I was able to communicate what my need was. I was also able to communicate to her that I see and understand what her need is, and that I am willing to fulfill her need, but that I have to take care of myself as well. Right. So it doesn't become personal now. It's not my mom doesn't care about me, or my mom doesn't love me, or my mom prefers to do other things. So I think that if we can really come from this place of understanding ourselves, we can create and are authentic, we can create clear boundaries. And from those boundaries, we're able to create connections around us that are, relationships are contractual agreements. I can tell you what my boundaries are and what my needs are, and you get to decide whether or not that is something that you are okay with, right? And if you're not, it's okay for you to move on to the next thing or person. And this is why earlier when I was talking about sometimes people do end up getting divorced, is because when these conversations are had, sometimes they're like, yeah, well, you're clear on what you want to need. I'm clear on what I want to need. We just can't find that middle ground. That is okay as well, right? Giving yourself permission to see that and know that that's okay. And I think that if we move through the world like this, we're going to force our systems to change, right? Because this could be a whole conversation for another day, but our school systems, our workplace, all of these systems are not, they're not they're not supportive of the individual, which in turn is actually not supportive of the whole, right? But they don't realize that, right? They want you to support the whole and ignore the individual, and don't understand that it actually doesn't work that way, right? It's not effective. So I think that we can step into a world that is more harmonious when we are most authentic and create connections and relationships that align with that, and then create the systems that support that, right? And because ultimately we are all one, and we have to respect and honor every part of the whole in order for the whole to be what it's meant to be, right? To function in its highest glory and power. And I think we're moving into that space. I think that it's happening slowly, and it's very messy in the way that it's happening. And I think that some people lose sight of that and feel quite pessimistic, because when they see the state that we're in the world right now, my husband always tells me, you see everything in rainbows and butterflies. And he's like, don't you see that the world's a mess? And I'm like, I do, but I think that this is the crumbling that needs to happen for the rebuild. And I think that the rebuild is going to be moving into a place of greater harmony.
Yes. So much yes to that. That is the foundation of the ethos of Better Together and reimagining our future and how we can be better together by awakening heart-centered connection, authentic connection within and throughout. So thank you so much for speaking to that. And thank you so much for this conversation, because it's a conversation that needs to be brought to the table. It needs to be brought to the forefront of all of our relations, and the relations that start with ourself, the work that you spoke to with the individual. Then it expands out into the family. Then it expands out into our community. It expands out throughout the world. And that's what reverberations is all about, that we were speaking to earlier, is reverberating a message that is in alignment with our soul's yes, with our heartfelt desire, with authenticity, of where we can reimagine a future that is inclusive, supportive, honoring, value-based, ethical, collaborative economy, all of these things. And then
Yes.
looking at where within our systems need to shift. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing, being of service in the capacity that you are. It is so needed and so valued. And I appreciate the time. And yes, there is a further conversation about systemic change. We're only
Yes.
scratching the surface. I really wanted to get to that. And the most important thing that I feel in these conversations is really tapping into our why. How did we get there? Why are we of service to what we're of service to? What leads us to that? And it's always something that happens from our experience that leads us into saying, oh, yeah, I remember why I'm here. And
Yes.
it's those questions that you asked. It's like, oh, yeah, biology. Oh, yeah, that's a part of it. And what's my deeper why? And now it's like, holy cow. And the
Hmm.
world gets to benefit in such a profound way from you showing up in that. So thank you again. And for everybody that's out there listening to this, when you go to our website, is to do the human design chart and see what's available for you. And then also, if her work aligns with you, make sure that you tune in with her. And Cynthia, can you share more about your website, anywhere that people can find you, social links, anything that you wish to share? Provide us everything.
Yes. So my website is soul, SOUL, alignedwellness.org. And my Instagram is cynthia.soulalignedwellness. And then on Facebook, they can find me through Cynthia Mendez-Tamayo. And when they visit my website, like I mentioned before, they can pull a free human design chart and a basic report and the self-care by design guideline. The other thing that I want to mention, which I know we didn't talk about here today, and we could definitely do that at another time as well, but I do want to also direct them to the EMDR and if they want to ask more questions about that, because I have had some very powerful EMDR sessions recently with clients. And just a little plug about that here is that it is advertised or marketed or was founded as being a trauma-based therapy. But the reality is that we all experience trauma, even if it isn't an experience that we would define as trauma, like that society would define as trauma, right? Like I was abused or I had a tragic car accident. Like those are the things that we think of when we think of like big traumas. But the reality is that I believe that we experience trauma anytime that we are asked to be someone or something different than who we authentically are, right? Because that creates the negative cognitions that we carry through our entire life. That's what carries the beliefs about who we think we are that may not be aligned with who we know we are. And there's often this disconnect. And what I have found is that when people go through this process of doing EMDR, it's almost like I had a client tell me, she's like, what is this? Like, it's like magic. What is it? What are you doing? And what it's really doing, it's addressing our subconscious thoughts, right? That programming that's running in the background that we're not even aware of. And what EMDR does is that it brings it to the forefront so that we can be aware of this programming that's running back there, these negative cognitions. And one of the biggest negative, there's two big negative cognitions that most of us fit into, which is I don't matter or I'm not good enough, right? And if we're able to deconstruct those, then it kind of like clears up the space to step into our authenticity. So I encourage people, I have the descriptions of my coaching models, each one of them on there. I also have information on the EMDR and on human design, and then a program that I am launching called Rise into Motherhood, which is addressing that first pillar of helping guide the moms towards discovering who they are and who they want to be within their role as a mother, but also just as an individual, so that then they can move on to the other pillars of the coaching program where they bring in their partner and the home logistics and the parenting, but really being able to help them go through this process of seeing what are the parts of themselves they want to leave behind, which are the parts they want to embody, building community around them. So really just going through all those different steps. I use EFT, I use mindfulness. There's a lot of different techniques that I bring into that program. And all the information is on my website. So they can go there and look at the different information. And then if they have any questions, I'm more than happy to schedule consultation calls where we can get on the phone and chat. I never start working with a client without chatting with them first to make sure that it's a good fit, because I want to honor their resources, right? Their time and money. And I want to make sure that I am the best person to serve them. And if I'm not, I have a community of people that have many skills, and I will be happy to direct them towards somebody who can better serve them, right? Because again, it's also taking away that sense of competition. There's enough for all of us, and we all have special skills. And I am more than happy to like connect them with somebody who can really support them and support the individual who's providing the service, right? Because I want to honor everybody's zone of genius.
Yes, so much yes to that. That is collaborative economy and honoring and synergistic relationships at the essence. And that's where we're moving. That's where we are. And
Yes,
that's what we are sharing and reimagining and repatterning and rippling out into our global relations. So thank you so
absolutely.
much, Cynthia. It has been such a beautiful conversation today. There's so many beautiful tidbits that we have touched upon that I look forward to continuing to explore. And again, for all of the listeners, soulalignedwellness.org. You can find all of the information on Cynthia there. And definitely, once again, want to share all of the resources that she is available for. So make sure that you visit her website. And again, thank you so much, Cynthia, for
Thank
being.
you.
You are so welcome. And for all of the listeners tuning in, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you dearly. And remember, we are better together.